This area is reserved for paying guests. Take your belongings and exit." The command was not a suggestion. It was delivered with practiced, prejudiced authority, loud enough for the entire Aurora Grand lobby to hear. Robert Maxwell, the floor manager, stood behind the counter, his suit jacket straining against his posture as he aggressively pointed toward the exit. He made no attempt to conceal his judgment. He looked directly at the black woman in plain attire and decided she was a security threat. What he didn't know was that in exactly 20 minutes, the woman standing calmly in front of him, the target of his humiliation, would fire him and every staff member involved, executing the order right there in the very lobby he was so zealously protecting. Before we get into this story fully, tell me where you're watching from. Comment your city below. And if this moment stopped you in your tracks the way it did the guests around her, hit that subscribe button and give the video a like. Now, let's rewind to how this moment started. Simone Harrington walked through the polished glass doors of the Aurora Grand alone. No entourage, no visible logos, just a black t-shirt, fitted jeans, and a pair of eyes that were calm but carried the weary strength of someone who had faced this exact scenario before. Her confident steps across the marble floor were silent, yet her understated presence sent a noticeable ripple through the high-end establishment. She approached the front desk. Behind it stood Robert Maxwell, flanked by Clara Voss and a male intern. None of them offered a greeting. They simply scanned her up and down, sizing her up as an imminent problem. "I have a reservation," Simone said, her voice even. "The owner's penthouse suite. The name is Harrington." Robert squinted at her, his expression dripping with disdain. "That's a secured top-tier residence. Are you sure you haven't mistaken this for a rental property?" Simone ignored the insult. She slid her ID and her black titanium corporate card, a subtle flash of status, across the counter. Robert picked up the card with 2 fingers, holding it as if it might contaminate him. "Strange," he muttered, loud enough to draw attention. "This looks highly suspicious." Clara Voss didn't hesitate. She discreetly pressed a silent alarm button on the console. Her voice, thin and nervous, rang out over the service intercom. "Security. Alert. Potential fraud attempt on a premium suite. We require immediate verification." "I'm not here for trouble," Simone countered, her voice low and steady. "I'm here for my room." Robert scoffed, turning slightly toward Clara. "We know their type. Flash a fancy card they found. Hope we won't check. It's an old scam." From across the atrium, 2 guests, an older couple, had already raised their phones, recording the scene. "They're harassing her," the man whispered to his wife, then narrated to his live-stream audience. "We're watching public harassment happen in real time at the Aurora Grand." Kenji, a veteran baggage handler with 30 years on the floor, paused by the elevator bank. He saw the recognition of injustice flash across his face, but knew better than to intervene directly. Simone, maintaining eye contact with Robert, took out her personal phone. She sent a silent, single-word text to her EVP, Marcus. "Activate." Robert, seeing the phones, felt the pressure but doubled down. "I'm securing this property for investigation." He thrust the card at Clara. "Lock it up now. It is evidence." Clara eagerly took the card and walked to a steel safe box behind the counter, placing it inside with unnecessary emphasis. She slammed the door shut. Simone didn't flinch, even as she felt the familiar knot of humiliation tighten in her stomach. She recalled a similar moment at 24, when her casual clothes led a gatekeeper to deny her access, forcing her to sleep in her car. That night fueled the fire that built this very company. Now, standing in the lobby she owned, she felt the same corrosive prejudice trying to erase her, but with one fundamental difference. Robert leaned forward, his finger jabbing through the air toward her. "Your reservation is cancelled. You're holding up real, paying guests. Leave, or the police will escort you." Simone met his gaze. "That's the last time you speak to me like that," she warned. "You're going to regret the next 19 minutes. Simone's thumb tapped a quick, practiced rhythm on the screen of her phone, sending the silent text to Marcus, her executive VP of operations. The message was simply the word activate. She didn't need to elaborate. Marcus knew the protocol for crisis observation. Every syllable, every arrogant gesture, every lie coming from Robert Maxwell's mouth was now being logged, time-stamped, and recorded in real time on a secure corporate server. It was the insurance she carried against this exact kind of predictable, prejudiced behavior. Robert, meanwhile, had turned his attention to the guests, his face contorted in an angry expression as he pointed towards Simone. He was so consumed by his self-appointed duty as gatekeeper that he didn't notice the silent, expanding audience that was gathering. A group of travelers, a family waiting for their car, a business executive on a video call, slowly clustered near the desk. Their collective discomfort, their whispers, and the glow of their phones signaled a shift. Two of the travelers, a young woman and a man, were filming the entire exchange. The sight of a manager shouting and pointing at a composed black woman was not just ugly, it was viral material. They were capturing Robert's tirade and Clara Voss's passive inaction with ruthless clarity. Clara, the clerk who had happily locked away Simone's card, stood like a pillar of complicit silence. Her eyes darted between her furious manager and the CEO, her pale face betraying a mixture of fear and absolute non-intervention. She offered no defense, no greeting, and no human courtesy, solidifying her role as an enabler of Robert's bias. Simone watched her, noting that the passive ones often did the most damage. This was not just Robert's mistake. This was a culture of bias she had unknowingly allowed to rot within her own brand. The clock ticked on, not toward the end of the confrontation, but toward the end of Robert Maxwell's career. Robert Maxwell's face, already flushed with indignation, tightened into a mask of righteous certainty. He slammed the black titanium card back onto the counter, his index finger stabbing down next to it like an accusation. "This is not simply a reservation dispute," he announced, his voice booming slightly now, drawing even more eyes. "This is a potential criminal matter. I am officially declaring this a stolen corporate asset." He looked straight at the gathering crowd of filming guests, daring them to contradict him. "Fraudulent activity is rampant, and we, at the Aurora Grand, take extraordinary measures to protect our real patrons from identity theft and organized crime." He spun to Clara Voss, giving her a sharp, definitive instruction. "Do not process the verification. We will await a full background check. Lock it up now. It is evidence." Clara, startled by the intensity of his tone, quickly fumbled open the shallow drawer behind the desk, revealing a small, brushed steel safe. She snatched up Simone's corporate card, treated with all the care afforded a biohazard, and placed it inside. The heavy thunk of the safe door slamming shut was a small but definitive act of corporate theft, witnessed by everyone. Simone felt the familiar, hot pressure behind her eyes, the one that always accompanied the injustice that flowed so easily from men like Robert. But she didn't allow the feeling to surface. She stood perfectly still, letting her gaze sweep over the lockbox, the smug manager, and the complicit clerk. The memory arrived, sharp, clear, and cold, a defining moment from 20 years ago. She was a scholarship student at Emory, flying back after a cross-country competition. Exhausted and dressed in sweats, she walked into a boutique hotel in Atlanta where she had reserved a room for the night. The manager at the desk, an older white man in a crisp uniform, had looked her up and down slowly, his contempt undisguised. "We don't get your kind here," he'd said, flatly lying that the system was down and she'd need to come back in the morning. She had slept in her rental car that night, shaking with fury, too embarrassed to call her parents. That humiliation, that raw, primal feeling of being denied basic dignity based on her appearance, hadn't crushed her. It had been the concrete foundation upon which she built Aurora Resorts and hospitality. She had sworn then that no guest, no person, would ever feel that specific, systemic exclusion in a place that she controlled. And now, standing in a lobby she owned, under a brand she created, the same tone, the same assumption, the same arrogant kind of man was trying to erase her again. The difference was that this time, she was not exhausted, she was not 24, and she was certainly not powerless. "You're done here," Robert declared, mistaking her silence for submission, his angry face easing into a self-satisfied smirk. "I suggest you wait outside." Simone stepped closer to the counter, her voice dangerously quiet. "You've just secured your future, Manager Maxwell," she said. "A future that does not include this building, this company, or this industry." Robert Maxwell's rage, initially controlled and professional, began to boil over as he realized the entire lobby was now watching, their phones held high. He wasn't just losing an argument, he was being documented. The red haze of pure, panicked fury washed over the fear of being seen. He pointed an accusatory finger, a gesture mirroring the anger captured in the image, and his voice broke, abandoning any pretense of hotel policy. "You're a fraud. Get out now," he shrieked, the words echoing off the marble floor. He stepped out from behind the counter. This was the moment of complete breakdown. The manager, shedding his uniform of authority, became a bully. He moved quickly around the desk, his hands coming up, and with a grunt of exertion, he physically shoved Simone toward the nearest exit, violating the cardinal rule of hospitality. The contact, though brief, was shocking. The movement brought an immediate reaction from the previously silent onlookers. A small gasp rippled through the crowd of guests who were filming. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was an assault. Suddenly, a figure stepped between them. It was Kenji, the long-term baggage handler. Kenji was a man of quiet efficiency and renowned integrity, a fixture in the hotel for nearly 30 years. He hadn't seen the beginning of the dispute, but he saw Robert physically put his hands on a guest, and his loyalty to decency immediately outweighed his loyalty to his paycheck. Without a word, Kenji planted himself directly beside Simone, a simple, solid barrier of dark blue uniform against Robert's frantic suit. He didn't speak, but his presence, calm, unmoving, and utterly unexpected, spoke volumes. Robert was momentarily stunned by the intervention. "Kenji, what the hell are you doing? Stand down. This is a security issue." Kenji finally spoke, his voice low and firm, carrying the weight of his seniority. "You don't put your hands on a guest, Robert. Ever." Simone, protected now by the unexpected shield, felt a surge of cold, focused determination. Robert had crossed the line from verbal abuse to physical contact, guaranteeing his fate. The clock was ticking, and the humiliation was nearly complete. She reached for her phone again, this time dialing a corporate voice number, preparing to end the spectacle. She had her witness, Kenji, and her evidence, the filming guests. The stage for the climax was set. Simone, still protected by Kenji's solid presence, pushed past the lingering shock of the physical contact. She took a slow, deep breath, stabilizing her voice, which was now dangerously composed. The time for veiled threats had passed. "I am giving you one final chance to correct this, Manager Maxwell," she stated, her voice cutting through the lobby's tense silence. "Return the card you illegally confiscated and apologize to me. You have exactly 1 minute to correct this before I correct your entire career." Robert's angry, panicked expression dissolved into a sneer of pure incredulity. He threw his head back and let out a harsh, barking laugh that was more noise than humor. "You don't speak for Aurora Resorts," he mocked, looking at the stunned guests for affirmation. "You don't even belong in the lowest tier of our loyalty program, let alone own a suite. You're an embarrassment, and this sad little act is over." His arrogance was a gift. The guests, initially just filming a confrontation, now reacted with open disgust. The sound of their murmurs and sharp sighs became a collective verdict against Robert. They weren't just onlookers. They were now active participants in the moral drama, their cameras becoming weapons of accountability. They had watched him escalate from suspicion to verbal abuse to outright assault, and his laughter was the final betrayal of every standard of service. Even Clara Voss winced, finally looking away from the desk. "You're done, Robert," Kenji said quietly, shaking his head. Robert turned on the baggage handler, his face dark. "And you're getting fired with her for insubordination." "I should have spoken up months ago," Kenji countered, his voice rising, shedding years of enforced politeness. "How many complaints did you kill this year? How many solo women of color did you claim were unauthorized, or trying to play the system, because they didn't look like they drove a Bentley? You're talking about fraud, but you've been committing the real fraud, Robert. You suppressed multiple complaints about profiling in the last year to protect your metrics. I filed one of them myself after you humiliated Mrs. Jenkins last Christmas." The revelation landed like a punch. The gasps from the guests were louder this time, not for the CEO, but for the corruption exposed by the man who risked everything to speak the truth. Robert's face went white. He knew that specific documented history was the one thing that could not be laughed away. He had lost control of the narrative, the staff, and the lobby. The clock ticked past the 1-minute mark. Simone looked directly at Robert, her eyes unwavering. He tried one last, desperate threat. "I'm calling the police. I'm having both of you arrested for trespass and aiding a suspect." But his hand shook too violently to reach his phone. The showdown was now inevitable. Simone reached for her phone again, not to call the police, but to connect with her corporate cavalry. The air in the lobby cracked with the tension of absolute silence. Robert Maxwell, his breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps, saw his entire facade crumbling. Kenji's quiet defiance, the filming phones, the collective judgment of the paying guests. It was all closing in. He was losing. In a final, desperate, authority-shattering move, he jabbed a trembling finger at Simone, and then at Kenji. "I don't care who you are. You are both trespassing. I am calling the police and having you arrested for fraud and assault, he screamed, reaching for the office phone with a hand that shook violently. It was too much. The guests, who had watched Simone endure public humiliation and physical aggression, now moved. The line between spectator and participant evaporated. The business executive, the family, and the young travelers all took a collective step forward, encircling Simone and Kenji, forming a spontaneous, silent human boundary between the manager and his targets. They didn't speak. Their bodies simply declared, "You cannot touch her again." The physical protection was the last thing Simone needed to solidify her resolve. She met Robert's wild, desperate eyes, absorbing the sight of his complete breakdown. The time for warnings was over. The 20-minute clock was ticking down to 0, and it was time for the final, definitive move. She took a single, measured step out from the protective circle of guests. Every sound in the lobby seemed to cease. The murmur of the air conditioning, the distant street noise, even the frantic buzzing of the phones. Simone raised her own phone, bringing Marcus and Amara, EVP of Operations and Corporate Counsel, onto the line via speakerphone. Her voice, amplified by the connection, was utterly devoid of emotion, a cool, precise instrument of corporate power. "Robert Maxwell," she said, her voice cutting across the silence like surgical steel. "You have confiscated the property of the company's founder. You have assaulted a guest. You have committed workplace intimidation, and you have, through negligence and prejudice, jeopardized the integrity of the Aurora brand. I am giving you one last piece of information before the change goes live." She paused, staring him down, letting the full weight of her reality crash upon him. Then, she delivered the final blow, her voice ringing with the absolute, unquestionable authority of ownership. "This property belongs to me. I am Simone Harrington, founder and CEO of Aurora Resorts and Hospitality." Robert's face instantly went slack, the blood draining from his features. Clara Voss gasped audibly behind the desk. The silence held for another excruciating beat until a small, faint voice, the voice of a customer standing near the executive on the video call, whispered the terrifying confirmation for everyone in the room. She owns the place, doesn't she?" The climax had arrived, and the manager was already standing on the rubble of his own career. Simone, holding the phone steady, brought her 2 executive contacts to bear on the now silent lobby. The speakerphone broadcast her corporate authority, cold and unhurried, contrasting violently with Robert's frantic meltdown. "Marcus," she commanded, addressing her EVP of Operations, "I need you to confirm that everything that has transpired in the last 20 minutes, from the initial profiling to the physical assault by Robert Maxwell, is logged, time-stamped, and secured. I also need you to confirm the real-time access revocation protocol for a Level 5 infraction." Marcus's voice, calm and professional, responded through the speaker, confirming the digital lockdown. "Confirmed, Ms. Harrington. All data is immutable. Real-time revocation is active." She then switched to her corporate counsel, Amara. "Amara, is the legal and HR package prepared, based on the documented history of suppressed complaints and the current act of physical violence?" "It is, Simone. Legal and HR are standing by. We only await your verbal authorization." Simone looked at Robert Maxwell, who was now utterly paralyzed, his eyes flicking frantically from the phone to Kenji to the circle of guests. She gave him one final, merciless look that acknowledged his complete and total failure. "Execute termination," she stated simply. Terminate Robert Maxwell. Terminate Clara Voss. Immediate access revocation. Do not pass go. Do not issue a final warning. The sound of the official decree was followed by a sharp, electric hum from the front desk console. The tablets used for check-in went blank. The ID scanner lights died. Simultaneously, the magnetic key cards clipped to Robert's and Clara's lapels flashed a brilliant, undeniable red, and the door to the restricted back office audibly locked with a solid clunk, sealing them out of their own workspace. They were instantly and publicly excised from the company network. Robert staggered backward, his hands instinctively reaching for the red flashing badge, unable to comprehend the totality of his undoing. Clara Voss stared at her own badge, her passive composure finally shattering into stunned disbelief. The official act of firing triggered an immediate, secondary reaction. The guests, no longer needing to protect the CEO, now focused their energy on the manager who had wronged them. The quiet whispers turned into a public reckoning. "That's right. Now he can't lie anymore," shouted the business executive who had formed part of the barrier. "I filed a complaint with him 2 months ago. He told me I was being overly sensitive when I asked why a maintenance worker of color was barred from using the main elevator." Another woman stepped forward, her phone still filming. "He denied my refund. My children were profiled in the gift shop last summer. He threatened to call the police on them. He said the complaints didn't meet the threshold for investigation." The floodgates had opened. The guests weren't just confirming Kenji's accusation. They were turning the spotlight on Robert's systemic corruption, revealing the hidden history of biased treatment he had suppressed to maintain his image. The termination was not merely for the assault on Simone. It was for the pattern of abuse and discrimination he had deliberately concealed, now exposed live and on camera. Robert and Clara stood stripped of their authority, drowning in the public evidence of their own malice. The sound of the corporate announcement faded, leaving a vacuum in the lobby that was instantly filled by the clamor of guests detailing Robert's past failures. Simone let the moment breathe, allowing the truth to fully penetrate the silence. When the testimonies subsided, she stepped forward again, commanding the lobby's attention simply by her presence. She needed no microphone. Her voice, cold and authoritative, carried clearly across the marble floor. "My name is Simone Harrington," she repeated, making sure the reality settled in every mind. "I am the founder and CEO of Aurora Resorts and Hospitality, and I am here to address the root cause of what you just witnessed." She swept her hand toward the flashing red badges of Robert and Clara. "I didn't come here to play some theatrical game of corporate punishment. I came to expose the bias you hide behind policy. You did it for me. You validated every hidden complaint, and you proved that this branch, the flagship of my brand, was fundamentally broken." She turned from the stunned, pale faces of the terminated staff and placed her hand on Kenji's shoulder. The long-term baggage handler stood taller, his earlier fear replaced by a quiet dignity. "Integrity," Simone continued, addressing the silent room, "is not something you file in an HR report. It is action taken when no one is watching." Kenji risked his livelihood and his family's security to stand up for a stranger and to expose a manager's corruption. That is the true heart of hospitality, the one this building forgot. She looked at Marcus on the speakerphone. "Marcus, I want to initiate the promotion immediately. Effective now, Kenji is the acting guest services manager of the Aurora Grand. His salary will be adjusted immediately, and his role will be made permanent following the company audit. Compensate him for his time and risk, effective retroactive to the moment he stepped in front of me. Kenji's eyes widened, his lips parting in shock, but he simply gave a short, humble nod. Simone then turned her full attention back to Robert Maxwell and Clara Voss. Robert looked broken, stripped of his authority and dignity, while Clara was openly weeping, realizing her complicity had cost her everything. Simone signaled to the hotel security team, who were now standing quietly to the side, waiting for direction. You are no longer employees of Aurora Resorts. I suggest you collect your personal effects and exit the building immediately. You have no further access to any system or area of this property. As Robert and Clara were slowly, publicly escorted toward the glass doors, the same doors Robert had tried to shove Simone through, the guests who had filmed the entire incident began to applaud. It wasn't a roar of celebration, but a slow, powerful, measured clapping, a rhythm of judgment that followed the disgraced manager and clerk out of the lobby and into the street. They were gone, forced to endure the final, collective silence and judgment of the people they had tried to dismiss. The air in the lobby instantly felt lighter, cleaner, and finally safe. The reckoning was over, and the transformation had begun. The lobby, now quiet save for the rhythmic clapping fading into the distance, was a scene of immediate, irreversible change. Simone Harrington stood in the center, next to Kenji, who was still slightly shell-shocked by his sudden promotion. The 20-minute timer had expired, and the reckoning was complete. Now came the difficult work of dismantling the rot Robert had left behind. Simone addressed the remaining staff, the housekeeping supervisor, the remaining clerks, the quiet bartender, her gaze firm. What you witnessed today, she announced, was not a personnel issue. It was a crisis of culture. Robert Maxwell didn't invent this bias, but he cultivated it and protected it. The fact that multiple guests had to expose his corruption for him to face consequences is a failure of this company's accountability, and I take responsibility for that failure. She was done with half measures. She looked directly into the camera lenses of the remaining guests, understanding that this moment was no longer private. Effective immediately, Aurora Resorts and Hospitality is initiating a full company-wide audit of every single one of our properties. This audit, she explained, would be forensic, digging into every suppressed guest complaint, every dismissed employee grievance, and every metric Robert and others like him had manipulated to hide systemic profiling. The goal was to uncover buried bias and eliminate it, root and stem, across the entire organization. To ensure this change was permanent and measurable, Simone announced the birth of a new corporate entity. We are establishing Aurora Forward, a new division dedicated not to hollow diversity slogans, but to verifiable, measurable diversity and equity outcomes. This was not a side project. It was a foundational commitment that would report directly to her board. She smiled at Kenji, the quiet hero of the hour. Kenji, your first job in your new role is to help us define what true unbiased service looks like from the front lines. Over the next 3 months, the changes rippled through the Aurora Grand. Robert's corruption was fully exposed, leading to the re-evaluation of dozens of wrongful terminations and denied guest refunds. The culture of fear was lifted, and under Kenji's genuine leadership, the front desk became a place of actual welcome. Simone officially unveiled the new era of her company at the annual Aurora Resorts Leadership Summit. Standing before the industry's elite, she used the story of the 20-minute reckoning in her own lobby to define the future. She spoke of her 24-year-old self, sleeping in a car because she didn't look the part, and how that pain became the driving force of her empire. She concluded her speech with the words that would become the company's new mantra, cementing a legacy of accountability and transformation. Hospitality doesn't begin with the smile you give. It begins with the respect you assume. The applause was deafening, not just for the CEO, but for the woman who, having been pushed toward the exit, had finally turned around and permanently opened the door for everyone else. If you believe everyone deserves respect, share this story. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and speak up when silence is no longer an option.